Hello, everyone, and welcome.
Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. Giving everyone a chance to get into the room here. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Well, we have a lot of great information to share with you all today, so I want to go ahead and get us kicked off here. So my name is Megan Davidson. I am the Stepping Up Program Director, and I'm so thrilled to be sharing this space with these folks that have decided to spend their time with us today. So this webinar is about stepping up and elevating the voices of people with lived experience. So please, yes, as Ashley dropped in the chat, please feel free to introduce yourself and where you are located. That would be great for us to know, what organization you're representing so that we know who the audience is. And we will go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. So what we're going to be talking about today is a project that began about a year ago that represents a collaboration between the CSG Justice Center, the Council of State Governments Justice Center, and C4 Innovations. And this partnership was really focused on elevating the voices of lived experience, hence the title of the webinar. And something that has been really important to our work at CSG and the Stepping Up initiative more specifically is really making sure that those voices of folks that have lived through the system and lived through these experiences really gets integrated into the work that we do. So we embarked on a partnership with C4. Kate, my colleague, will talk about that more momentarily. But we embarked on this partnership to really create an experience and a foundation for where we can incorporate these voices and give this opportunity for folks that really give the opportunity for us to hear from folks that have had this lived experience and incorporate that into our initiative. So I will talk a little bit more about Stepping Up momentarily, but for those folks that aren't familiar, Stepping Up is a national initiative that is focused on keeping individuals with serious mental illness and or co-occurring substance use disorders out of local criminal justice systems, particularly jails. Next slide, please, Andrea. And so that initiative has been up and running, and I'll show a timeline here momentarily for several years. And in recent years, we've really been trying to shift into thinking about how can we really revitalize the model, make sure that it is fully equitable and encompassing different viewpoints and perspectives. And so the emphasis on incorporating the lived experience perspective has been really important and something that we really focused on in the last year. And again, Kate will talk more about that momentarily. So we will talk a little bit about the Stepping Up initiative, the project background from the Stepping Up or from the CSG perspective. C4 will jump in, our partners will talk a little bit about the project specifically, and then we will turn it over to our lived experience advisory panel, which is what you all are here to hear from today, who will walk us through this work, what this work is for them, and their findings and reflections from this partnership. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I'm Megan Davidson, the program director for Stepping Up at the Council of State Governments. Joining me today is Kate Reed, our project manager within Stepping Up on the Behavioral Health Division. And so she'll be speaking momentarily. So that's representing our team. Next slide, please. Andrea Chambers is also joining us. She's helping me kind of flip through the slides, and she's with our operations team and also supports on all things Stepping Up. So we're grateful for your support, Andrea. So for those folks that aren't necessarily familiar with CSG, we are a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that really works with both a membership association that serves state officials in all three branches of the government. And we also conduct policy and research and really try to combine those things to really develop strategies that increase public safety and strengthen communities. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we've really been focusing on, as I mentioned, as an organization as a division and within our program is really advancing equity. And so this is our equity statement. It's really about advancing racial equity in all of our work, both internal to our organization and externally in the work that we do. So really trying to promote and do work that dismantles racial inequities across the justice and partnering organizations, looking at high quality research and analysis that really drives reducing those inequities and so forth. And so this project really, it also has the component of that and certainly dovetails closely into that equity space. Next slide, please. So I mentioned a little bit about stepping up. To take a step back, we are a national initiative, as I mentioned, and we are in partnership with the American Psychiatric Association Foundation and the National Association of Counties. They are our partners in this national initiative. And as I mentioned, it is really focused on helping counties reduce the over-incarceration of people with serious mental illness in jails. Next slide. So Stepping Up has been around for about 8 years. And we have this, actually this slide needs to be updated because we have more than 579 counties and 45 innovators that are doing this work. They are rolling up their sleeves and they are committed to really reducing these numbers in their county jails. And we're so excited to work with them and partner with them on this work. And so these are communities that are really working across the country doing this work. And we provide a framework. Stepping Up is basically a framework that helps counties do this work. And we kind of provide them the guidance and the steps to do that. And we call it a DIY model. So they take that model and they implement that in their county and drive that. So we really have been up and running for about 8 years, a little over 8 years, coming up on 10 years before we know it. So that's a little bit about Stepping Up, and happy to answer additional questions on that, or we'll have contact information at the end for folks that are interested in learning more about the initiative specifically. Next slide. So a little bit of our timeline. We began in 2015, really ramping up, conceptualizing what is the initiative and getting it up and running with a few starter states and starter counties that were really up and running early. In 2017, we really focused on, moving towards getting a self-assessment tool. How can counties know where they are? Helping counties really think about data. What sort of data should we be looking at to be thinking about targeting reductions for folks that are coming into the system with serious mental health issues and so forth. And then we move towards Set, Measure, Achieve, which is one of our kind of trademark initiatives that's focused on helping counties really set and measure and achieve successes that are focused on those benchmarks that are really about reducing those metrics associated with SMI and jail populations and so forth. So that's a very brief snapshot and overview of Stepping Up. And as I mentioned, the last couple of years, we've really been trying to integrate that racial equity and lived experience lens, which I will now turn it over to Kate to talk a little bit more about that. Next slide.
Thank you, Megan. My name is Kate Reed. I'm a project manager here at the Justice Center working on the Stepping Up team. I just want to say I'm really excited and very humbled to welcome C4 Innovations and some of the lived experience advisory panelists to talk with us this afternoon. They are part of a larger project that's funded by the Langeloth Foundation to really relook at stepping up through a racial equity lens and also incorporate the voices of people who have had firsthand experience in both the behavioral health and the justice systems. As Megan had mentioned, the Stepping Up framework has been around for over 8 years. But what the framework was missing was both a racial equity lens and input from individuals who've been directly impacted by these systems. So for the past year or so, racial equity and lived experience have been Stepping Up's focus. In 2021, we received funding from the Langeloth Foundation to really just revamp Stepping Up. We brought in racial equity experts to fully assess Stepping Up. They conducted focus groups and interviews with various Stepping Up counties, and they clearly saw the need to update the framework and infuse equity and personal experience throughout. Just this past May, we developed a racial equity brief that provides specific guidance for how counties can begin to address racial equity. And you can find that brief on our website. I also want to mention that we partnered with racial equity experts from the Center for Effective Public Policy to assist with that work. For the lived experience piece, we partner with C4 Innovations because of their expertise in this space. They helped interview and select a group of 8 truly amazing individuals with diverse backgrounds and experiences from all over the country to form the Lived Experience Advisory Panel, or LEAP for short. Under C4's guidance, we worked with the LEAP for several months. They've shared their experiences, conducted focus groups with other people with lived expertise, and that includes family members of those who've been directly impacted as well. They reviewed stepping up documents and offered an incredible amount of insightful feedback. One such document is foundational to stepping up. It's called the 6 Questions document. And we updated it to include racial equity and lived experience. And the LEAP team was able to critique it and have their feedback incorporated into the final document, which will hopefully be released in the next month or so. LEAP will also be releasing an FAQ document, which will provide guidance for how to meaningfully engage folks with lived expertise in this work. I can't say this enough. We are just really incredibly grateful for C4 and LEAP. And through this project, we really got to understand just how important it is to not only hear from these individuals, but to really have them in leadership roles with decision-making power, because I mean, they really are truly the experts. We're so thankful to have some of them here with us today, and really hope this kind of work can continue not only in our organization, but in counties and organizations across the country. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us today. And I'm going to turn it over to our friends from C4 Innovations. Next slide.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Hi, my name is Dr. Ashley Stewart. I'm the director for the Center of Health Equity and a racial equity subject matter expert at C4 Innovations. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about C4, but I also wanted to take an opportunity to welcome up other members of the C4 team who are here today, just so that they can briefly introduce themselves. So I'll turn it to you, Daisy and Dwayne.
All right, greetings. My name is Dwayne Watkins, and I'm the Health Equity Manager here at C4 Innovations, and I was one of the lead members with the LEAP this season.
Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to connect with us. My name is Daisy Hernandez. I am the REC Director of Peer Recovery TA with C4 Innovations, and served as a team member with the Center for Health Equity in the selection process of the LEAP members.
Thank you so much, team. And we can go to the next slide. I just want to kick us off before we start to hear from the amazing perspectives of the LEAP, just by sharing our deep, deep gratitude and appreciation to be able to partner with CSG, the Justice Center, and Stepping Up. This has been phenomenal. And in that process, we had the opportunity to meet a lot of different people. Dwayne's going to tell you about how many people we got to meet and what that whole process looked like. But the folks who you'll hear from today, as well as the perspectives that'll be represented from the LEAP members who aren't here today, are just so graciously given to us. We've just been beyond empowered to really see the impact and the dynamicism, the meritoriousness of lived experience through this process, and encouraged to continue to ensure that every single thing that we do and every single thing that's done is incorporated meaningfully with lived experience. And so C4 Innovations is a woman-owned but mission-driven organization that focuses very heavily and primarily on lived experience. In fact, a majority of our staff and folks who are employed at C4 are people with lived experience in a multitude of different areas of our subject matter expertise. So in every single space that we are working in, we have folks who are who are part of the organization who share lived experience themselves and lived expertise. Our mission is to reduce disparity through person-centered, trauma-informed, and racially equitable practices. We do that by focusing on folks and populations that are systemically and structurally marginalized. And then we work collaboratively with those individuals, with the communities, with leaders, with policymakers, with organizations to promote cultural humility, restorative justice, utilization of lived experience, meaningful incorporation of lived experience through technical assistance, support, organizational change processes, and looking at what it looks like for that to be systematized as part of people's practices. And so our expertise leads to healthier individuals, communities, and most importantly, most effective systems. We've been really committed to answering that critical question of not only what are the issues that folks are experiencing, but what is the next steps and what are the different ways that we can be meaningfully impactful in creating structural and systemic change that's sustainable and concretizable. So it's been just a wonderful experience. And if we go to the next slide, you know, we just got a wonderful project overview by Kate, so I won't go into it too much. And Dwayne's going to talk a little bit about the specifics. But for us, it was really important to develop an opportunity to get meaningful insight and information that could be woven into the amazing work that Stepping Up and CSG are doing, and to ensure that we can get information out to folks, such as folks who are able to join this webinar, about how to meaningfully do that. So we're excited. We want you to hear from the LEAP. We're grateful for the LEAP. We'll also talk about what that process looked like to make sure that we honor and acknowledge the commitment and the work that the LEAP has done. We have been supporting this initiative and we've been facilitating it, being helpful thought partners in it. But everything that you're going to hear today, everything that's on the FAQ, everything that was in the focus group protocol, everything that was in the draft survey came from the LEAP. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that and put that paramount forefront in this conversation to say, yes, we've been happy and excited to support this, but this has truly been the incredible work of the 8 individuals who you'll have an opportunity to be introduced to, and some of whom you'll get to meet today. So I'll pass it over to you, Dwayne, to tell us a little bit more about the LEAP process.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ashley. And thank you all again for taking your time out to be here today, and special kudos to the LEAP. And how did we get here? So we're going to begin to talk about the process of the LEAP selection. The process of the LEAP selection, we wanted to make sure that this process was as inclusive and as equitable as possible. So we wanted to make sure that we were intentional in every step of the way, and that included from our marketing materials. We made sure that we send out the curated distribution list to apply to be a part of the LEAP application submission. Would you believe it or not that we had over 168 applicants to apply for this LEAP? So that in itself is indicative to say that lived expertise and lived experience is needed in this space. With the LEAP application submission, we utilize a panel of subject matter experts from our C4 innovations team. We all read and reviewed each application thoroughly, and we used the tool to score each applicant equitably. Now, the C4, we conducted these interviews for candidates that made it past the initial application submission screening. So from that 168, we then narrowed it down to 38 applicants, which was very, very tough to do. We must admit, almost impossible. But with the 38, we were able to offer interviews. And out of those interviews, we were able to select the 8 LEAP members in which we will, that became your final applicants. And they were notified of being selected to be on the panel. Next slide. And this is our wonderful lived experience advisory panel. We have Larry Leo Davis, Manny Gomez, Philip Cooper, Edwin Suarez, Helen Skipper, Parker Chamberlain, Ronald Marshall, and Ruth Utenage. Again, we wanted to make sure that this process was as equitable as possible, and the selection was almost impossible to do. But we knew that when we saw these applicants and that when we had them in our interviews and, you know, just putting everything together, that we had a great group of folks, but we just didn't know how dynamic these individuals were going to be. And we're glad that you're here today to be able to witness some of their brilliance. Next slide. So in the spirit of grounding this conversation, we're going to ask each LEAP member, they will post this prompt and we'll be answering this question. And that is if they could just briefly share their personal journey and experiences that have led them to become a part of the LEAP.
Yes, absolutely. And right before we get into that, thank you so much, Dwayne. And before we get into honoring their responses to this question, I just wanted to put a few details for folks who are in the chat. So glad to see 139 people in this call. We are welcoming questions throughout the session so we can begin to correlate them and make sure that they're able to be responded to. So please feel welcome to use the QA feature to type in questions. If you put them in the chat, I'll also be looking for them there as well. We encourage you to affirm and to communicate in the chat throughout the entirety of this webinar. You're welcome to chime in, to affirm, to share your excitement in the chat, and we would love that. We would love for you to be able to do that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ashley. All right, so first up, answering this prompt, we have Larry Leo Davis. Next slide, please.
First of all, good afternoon, everyone. And thanks, Dr. Ashley and Dwayne, for that beautiful introduction. So what brought me to the LEAP panel itself? Well, I'm a dual degree student, now candidate, pursuing my PhD and my MBA in social work and social entrepreneurship at Loyola University, Chicago. My research focuses on the intersection of fatherhood engagement, attachment, adolescent development, mental health, citizen reentry, justice reform, and social policy formulation. I earned my master's degree in social work and program evaluation from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, in addition to my master's in public health policy from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Zurich School of Public Health. Now, my research embodies both the culture of health and social justice frameworks. I'm a first-generation college student and graduate, and I'm an active servant leader and activist in my community, given the fact that I've overcome both the foster care system and the mass carceral system. I have survived and overcome homelessness and alcohol dependency, all by the age of 17. Through my adversities, in addition to the work that I do now at Cook County Correctional Facility, I continue to advocate for truth, service, and justice. The systemic inequities that I continue to overcome contributes to my understanding and my passion for systems change within the domains of policy, economic development, and institutional programming. Now, all of these factors have encouraged me and has steered me in my journey of applying and becoming a LEAP panelist. And with that, I'll turn to my colleague, Skip.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. So grateful to be in the presence of giants. My name is Skip. The reason why I'm on this LEAP panel is simple. I spent 25 years going in and out of systems. Most importantly, the criminal justice system. Every time I entered, I suffered from an unchecked mental illness. I suffered from addiction. I was homeless. Every time I left the same way. At no point did I receive the support and services I needed to survive. I was part of the, you can't do anything, you will never do anything, you will never be anyone cohort. But in 2007, when I came home from the last time and I had an epiphany, and my epiphany was this: recovery is mine. Success is mine. And I leaned forward into that. Today, I am the executive director of the New York City Justice Peer Initiative. I am a lived experiences scholar and academic, as I am in grad school, on my way to where Leo is, to a PhD. I believe firmly in the validity of lived experiences. I believe we cannot reform this criminal justice system. We cannot transform it without using us as change agents. I am all for the directly impacted. I train, I certify. Not only that, in justice peer work, I also go into agencies, into national forums such as this, and train employers on how to successfully retain those who are justice impacted. We do come with some barriers. We do come with some baggage, but you have to be willing to overlook and overcome those barriers. I do this on a national front. Again, thank you for having me. I will turn this over to, hold on a minute, Ronald.
Thank you, Skip. I appreciate that. Hello, everybody. My name is Ronald Marshall. I'm from New Orleans, and like my colleagues, I believe in the power of lived experiences. I served 25 years in the Department of Corrections, went to prison early. On the inside, I used my voice to make change, whether it was dealing with mental health, dealing with trauma. Even when I come home, I'm the chief policy analyst at Vote. I use my lived experiences on the state level to change policies in the criminal justice. I teach a mental health curriculum in the Department of Corrections as well as the Orleans Parish Jail. I believe that lived experiences, like Skip said, should be the change agents. No one can speak how the rubber hits the road unless you're on that road. And I've been on that road a long time. I'm talking about 25 years in prison. And prior to that, I come from domestic violence. I suffered with 9 of the early childhood experience at the ACEs. I suffered with 9 of them. The only one I don't suffer with is the sexual part. I've never been sexually molested, but I do have 9 ACEs. And those ACEs led me to imprisonment. And it was in prison that I grew up. And I realized, hey, I have a story to tell. And I can use my story to impact change upon my release. And I told my friends, I told my community members, the ones that are on the inside, who I left behind, I said, man, I would never forget y'all. I said, the day I walk out of this prison, I'm going to use everything I've been through in this place to help you brothers. If I can't help you come home, I'm going to damn sure help change some of the conditions on the inside just to make prison just a little more bearable. I'm an abolitionist at heart, but I also know that I cannot abolish the prison system because it's a big business today. It's like a monolith. It's so strong and so powerful. What I can do is tweak some policies here, tweak some policies there by using my lived experience to make life on the inside better for those brothers and sisters on the inside. And on the outside, I'm going to continue to use my lived experience in every Senate and House representative hearing that I'm in, because I know that with the power of my lived experience, I can be changed. And and what brought me to the LEAP, I knew that when I seen the application, I seen the advertisement, I said, man, I got to get on this panel. I got to get on here. On a national level, my voice advocating for change on a national level, I said, I got to get on here. I talked to Dwayne, talked to Dr. Ashley, talked to the whole team, and I gave my story. And I guess my story was the ingredient that they saw that, okay, this guy here has it. This guy here has a powerful story. We're going to use him. And they've been using me ever since. And I'm so happy to be a part of this story. I'm happy to be a part of this, my LEAP members, CSG, I'm happy to be part of them. Thank you, everybody, for having me. And I'm going to pass it to my guy, Edwin Suarez.
Hi, everyone. My name is Edwin Suarez. I'm a certified addictions recovery coach here in Massachusetts. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I felt that my perspective would be valuable in this initiative. I'm a person that is dual diagnosed. I have spent time in the county and state correctional facilities in Massachusetts with no opportunities for change once released. My change came later in life. Had to figure things out pretty much on my own years later. But again, I'm honored to be part of this panel and do my part in this initiative. So I'm going to pass it to Philip Cooper.
Right on, right on. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your day to participate on the panel. To my fellow panelists and for the people that's tuning in, this is a very, very important conversation. Substance use disorder is trying to take the world out. You did. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I've been kicking the disease of addictions butt since January the 16th, 2009. But guess what? It was prison that saved my life. If it had not been for me getting incarcerated, I probably would have been dead from an overdose. You feel me? I'm one of the guys from the crew I used to roll with that's still living. Some of the people I used to get high with, they dead now. Sometimes it was accidental overdoses. They putting fentanyl in everything right now. And I recover out loud, and me recovering out loud is what got me the connections that I have, because in the Black community, we don't like to talk about our mental health as much. We don't want to admit that we have substance misuse issues. And so people like me are starting to have more of a voice and more of a platform, because we start to become what they call stigma slayers. Everybody put stigma slayer in. If you're a stigma slayer, go ahead and throw stigma slayer in all caps in the chat. And I got connected with a lady from SAMHSA. Shout out to her, Dr. Stein. I believe she's seen this come up. She forwarded it to me, and she's one of the connections I have with SAMHSA. And she said, Philip, this is for you. Be sure to apply. And so I applied. I'm always excited about the national work. Like it was so great to meet Skip and Daisy when we were in DC. I'm a country boy, so like when I get to go to the big cities, it's so refreshing to see people that have similar lived experiences to me. It helps to calm my anxiety. But just very grateful to be here and to be a voice. When I was in prison, I seen the magic of peer support because I was a peer counselor. A New Direction is the program I was a peer counselor for, and it's under the Hazelden umbrella. For you behavioral health professionals may have heard of Hazelden. And while I was in prison, the job that I'm most proud of working, it wasn't a dorm janitor, it wasn't road squad picking up trash off the highway, but it was me being a peer counselor and me being able to share my story with other young men who were in the penitentiary who didn't want to admit that they had substance misuse problems, but when I shared my story, they was willing to talk about it. So just grateful to be here. I believe in the power of peer support. And I'll just say this, I know this ain't church, but the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, and he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. And I'll pass that to Daisy.
Thanks, Philip. That's always so hard to follow up, right? But I enjoy sharing spaces with everyone in the panel. I've been in meetings before, I've been in webinars before and trainings before, and I know there's amazing knowledge and energy in the panel. I became part of the selection process. I'm not necessarily part of the LEAP panel, but I was part as a C4 team member of the Center for Health Equity. I wanted to be part of the selection process because as a woman in sustained recovery and one who has successfully reintegrated her family and community from incarceration, I felt it necessary and a responsibility to ensure that the voice of a woman with lived experience in both incarceration and mental health and recovery be represented, and that I put my 2 cents, because nowadays my 2 cents are valuable. I fully believe that creating access is more than just opening the door and letting your own people in, but it's opening the door and maintaining it open for everyone to have the opportunity and the platform to share their experience. My experience as a woman of color is not the is-all end-all of sharing experience, and it's necessary. I find it necessary to create spaces for not just all women, but all men, all members of LGBTQ+, to have a space and a platform to share their experience, to share the work that changes the lives of other people that are experiencing the same challenges in life. I, like Philip, my pathway to recovery was incarceration. There was no detox doors to keep me, or distance to keep me from going into my stomping grounds. And I was lucky in that Hampden County Sheriff's Department on Western Mass has, historically really focused on treatment and recovery versus corrections, and the resources offered to me in the state put me through, in this county, put me through a graduate degree, and reunited me with my son under the same house. So I'm really grateful to have my own lived experience, but have the opportunity to be the door holder for many people who have similar experience, to inform the work that we're all doing throughout the nation. So thank you.
All right, thank you everyone for sharing your experience. As you can see, all in for a treat today. And this has been a pleasure to be able to experience everyone's expertise and to also lead us to this point. So now we're going to be talking about the importance of lived experience advisory panels. And we have Edwin who's going to kick that off for us. So next slide.
The importance of the LEAP. By actively involving individuals with lived experience, it is possible to develop more humane, effective, and equitable approaches to addressing mental health and substance use issues, ultimately reducing the over-incarceration of vulnerable populations. Next slide. The importance of
uplifting the importance of uplifting the voices of lived experiences. Number one, empathy and understanding. Members of a lived experience panel have personal experience with mental illness and substance abuse issues. Our firsthand experience provides invaluable insights into the challenges and struggles faced by individuals in crisis, fostering greater empathy and understanding among criminal justice professionals. Number two, reducing stigma. Our lived experience can help break down the stigma associated with mental illness and substance abuse. Our stories humanize the individuals affected and challenge stereotypes, encouraging a more compassionate response. Number three, inform policy and practice. Panel members can offer practical, real-world perspectives that inform the development of policies and practices within the criminal justice system. This insight can lead to more effective, evidence-based strategies for diverting individuals away from incarceration towards appropriate treatment and support. Number four, trauma-informed approaches. Lived experience panelists often bring an acute awareness of the trauma that can accompany mental health and substance abuse issues. This understanding is crucial in shaping trauma-informed approaches within the criminal justice system, which are more likely to promote healing and rehabilitation. Number five, engagement with community resources. Panelists can help bridge the gap between the criminal justice system and community-based mental health and addiction services. They can provide information about available resources and help ensure that individuals receive the support they need upon release. Number six, accountability and transparency. Lived experience panels hold the criminal justice systems accountable by offering an external perspective. We promote transparency and oversight, which can help identify and rectify systemic issues that contribute to over-incarceration. Number seven, educational opportunities. Panel members can engage in education and training sessions with law enforcement, judges, and other criminal justice professionals. These sessions provide opportunities for mutual learning and can lead to more effective crisis response strategies. And finally, number eight, advocacy and awareness. Lived experience panelists often become advocates for policy changes and improved mental health and addiction services. Our advocacy efforts can contribute to broader social awareness and support for reform. Next slide, please.
So the top 5 strategies. 1, form lived experience advisory groups. And this is important because you want to have diversity. Diversity is very important. Diversity is powerful. And plus you don't want to tokenize lived experience. Each lived experience can look different. It can look different in a rural area. It can look different in an urban area. But we got to understand that we cannot afford to tokenize lived experience or we will water it down. And then that takes away from the lived experience having the potential to be lived expertise. The next one is peer support services. Integrating peer support specialists into crisis response teams. You can be creative with your peer support programs. You look at diversion programs. We've had those in the county where I serve, in Buncombe County, North Carolina, but peer supports, they bring a unique perspective and a lived experience that can it doesn't replace the counselor, it doesn't replace the clinician, but it enhances. And we are into enhancing and addressing equitable access. And that's exactly what the peer support specialist does, a very important strategy. The next one is evaluation and continuous improvement. As we do these programs, we understand that evaluation is a major key. We want to have the data, we want to have the tangible tactics that we use so that they can be replicated. But you can't do any of that if you don't have the evaluation in place. And it's all about continuous improvement. We, the people, right? We, the people in recovery, we understand that recovery is not a destination, but it's a journey. And it's the same way with this work that we're doing. So that means there's always continuous improvement. Just because I have almost 15 years of sobriety doesn't mean that I'm perfect. It doesn't mean that I can't grow anymore. And we want to treat the systems the same way. The next one is advocacy and policy change. As we look at policy change, we also know that it's potential for funding, collective impact funding, braided funding. Sustainability is always something that we have to have on the forefront of our programs and thinking about that. And so when we look at the advocacy, we want to have genuine advocacy, and having those people with lived experience at the table is a major key. And policy change, even with change of policies comes opportunities for funding that can even pay for the peer supports, because there are certain policies in place to help certain people, people from marginalized communities, formerly incarcerated people who are in the foster care system, people who are adopted. It's just a lot of different things, from the education system, workforce development, behavioral health, medical. It's just so many different resources from the criminal legal system side of things. Whenever we're ready to make sure that a returning citizen is tapping into them, the policy can impact that. So advocacy and policy change is a top 5 strategy for us. And last but not least is public awareness campaigns. Public social media, educating the community. Education is everything. For us to continue to slay this stigma, we have to educate people. And, in the rural areas that I've been in, a lot of times, especially my fellow church folk, because I'm church folk, you dig? I am church folk, but I know that church folk can do harm when they don't have the education that they need. So we want to get them educated to reduce this stigma and foster support, get them trainings like recovery coach training, the language training, because, sometimes we can accidentally use stigmatizing language because we don't know no better. But what we want to do is get people the education that they need. And that can be done with public awareness campaigns. Next slide.
So how can counties establish lived experience advisory panels? So here at the LEAP, we established 10 key steps to help you all and counties surrounding the nation to establish such committees, and doing so in an effective manner. So first of all, we want to identify the need. You want to determine the specific areas where lived experience or lived expertise can make a significant impact. Systems such as the criminal legal system, mental health services, or substance use programs. Secondly, stakeholder engagement. We feel that this is critical in establishing a sustainable lived experience advisory panel around the nation. You want to identify and engage key stakeholders, including individuals with lived experience, community organizations, mental health professionals, and government agencies. Third, we want to define the purpose and the goals of this committee. You want to clearly identify and outline the purpose and objectives of the advisory committee or the panel that you establish. What issues will you address? And what are the expected outcomes? These are 2 questions you need to ask yourself. Fourth, recruitment. You all should develop a recruitment strategy to attract individuals with lived experience, but also those folks that have the passion to supplement their lived experience. This may involve collaborating with local advocacy organizations, using social media, or attending community events. Fifth, the application and selection process. Create an application process for interested folks. This can include submitting resumes, providing references, or writing a personal statement. 6, diversity. As my colleague Coop already mentioned, diversity is a critical component of creating these lived experience advisory panels. Diversity ensures that the panel not only has wide representation, but it captures the backgrounds, demographics, and experiences across the country. 7, training and orientation. You all should provide training and orientation for your selected members. This can include information about the role of the panel, the goals, and or the responsibilities of those panel members. 8, the meeting schedule. You want to establish a regular meeting agenda and schedule that identifies the objectives of that panel. 9, you want to identify leadership and cultivate the leadership within your panel members and help them elevate those voices. And lastly, but not least, compensation. 10, a critical component of meaningful engagement with individuals with lived expertise and lived experience is to offer fair, inclusive, and sustainable practices by providing compensation for their lived expertise. Next slide.
Hello, everybody. Skip is back again. We're going to talk about what does meaningful engagement with lived experience look like. Meaningful engagement with lived experience involves creating a collaborative, respectful, and empowerment environment where individuals who have personally faced mental health or substance use challenges are actively involved in the decision-making process, policy development, and service design. Yeah, that was a mouthful, so I'm fitting to go off script right here. That was a mouthful, but at the end of the day, what does that look like? Let's unpack this and distill it down. Inclusive hiring. What is inclusive hiring? You're going to actively seek, you're going to look for individuals who have that vital, important lived experience to be part of any initiative or program. You're going to acknowledge such a great word, their unique experience and perspectives. You're also going to acknowledge the time and support. You're going to recognize that we come with some additional things. There might be barriers. There might be things we need to navigate. We might need accommodations. Accommodations for those with lived experiences can look very different than accommodations for those with physical disabilities, but yet we might still need them. We might need to be accommodated to leave early to go meet with parole. You never know, but please be open to the fact that you have hired someone with valid lived experiences and they come with more than that. Direct compensation. Can we get real here? Let me use the street vernacular. Oh, pay us like we weigh. And we weigh a lot. The enormous impact and value add that we bring to any project, nothing for us without us, is without question. It is almost off a scale of what is appropriate compensation. But let's just look at this. If you're hiring a researcher and you're paying $100 an hour, and you're also hiring someone with lived experiences, yeah, we're right there with them. And I say that from experience as an academic, as a scholar, and also as someone with lived experiences. Active involvement in decision-making. What does that mean? That means, I'm gonna speak personally. I know you did not have me come sit in this room and act like a lump on a log and not say anything. I know you didn't get, not Mrs. Skipper's baby daughter, Helen. But this is the same with all of us with lived experiences. We come to bring. We don't come to take, we come to bring. Please allow us to bring what got us in the room, and we are in the room. Design and implementation opportunities, very important. Do not call us in when you are at the end. We should be there from the beginning, from a top-down process. Don't call us in when you have developed the policies, you've looked at the research questions, you've gone out and garnered research participation, and now you're like, as an afterthought, oh yeah, could you check this out? Please tell me how this looks. No. Not only do we deserve a seat at the table, we are the table. We need to be sitting at our table. You need to come to us from the beginning, not at the bottom. And lastly, feedback mechanisms. This allows us to provide ongoing feedback. Again, don't use us for a smidgen when you have the whole enchilada. Use us in all aspects from the beginning to the end, and definitely use us for feedback as you build these policy implications. This is affecting our community. We are still affected by these systems. Why would you not ask us, how does this look? Do you think this is feasible? Because we're going to tell you the real deal. Thank you. Next slide, please.
All right. Thank you, Skip. Thank you, Leo. Thank you, Ronald. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Daisy. Thank you, Edwin. And thank you to everyone that has been involved in today's webinar. And so now, we have talked about the importance of these type of panels, the lived experience panels. We talked about the importance of uplifting the voices of lived expertise. We have went over the LEAP's top 5 strategies. We talked about how counties can establish LEAPs. What does meaningful engagement with lived expertise look like? And now we're going to discuss, what does meaningful engagement produce? I think that the production of it all is indicative of what you have seen today leading up to this point. So this is our LEAP's top 8 recommendations for counties participating in the Stepping Up initiative. And again, implementing these diversion programs. Counties should establish diversion programs to redirect individuals with mental health challenges away from criminal justice systems and into appropriate treatments and support services. That expansion of mental health crisis response teams, again, around that training, and counties should bolster their mental health crisis response teams to ensure timely and compassionate interventions for individuals with crisis. This evaluating, screening, and assessment. Looking into these evaluating and assessment processes to make sure that they are equitable and fair, and to better identify and address the needs of the people with mental health challenges. That community-based mental health services. Counties should provide accessible mental health treatment and support services within the community to reduce the reliance on incarceration. The enhanced coordination, improving coordination between criminal justice and the behavioral health systems to ensure seamless care for individuals with mental health challenges. This securing of additional funding. Counties should actively seek additional funding to not only support the mental health initiatives and services, but to ensure adequate resources for implementation of these programs and these great ideas that the LEAPs have came up with today. And then the destigmatization of mental illness. We have to work on destigmatizing the mental illness within the community to promote understanding and to support for individuals seeking help. And number 8, and last but certainly not least, this training and education piece. It is critical and it's vital to provide comprehensive training and education programs, not only for law enforcement and correctional staff, to equip them with the skills and knowledge needed to effectively manage and support individuals in crisis situations, but everyone that is involved and around someone that may potentially be in crisis. So again, before we open the panel for discussion, just want to give a quick round of applause for our LEAP members for today. And now I would turn it over to Dr. Ashley as we begin our LEAP panel discussion. I know that we have seen some questions in the chat, and we have made sure to note those as well. If you have additional questions, please go ahead and click that Q&A and let us know, and or you may be able to come off mute and ask your question as well.
Amazing, amazing. And as we get ready to go into hearing a discussion as a group and hearing from folks directly, I want to acknowledge our LEAP members who were not able to be on this call but have been contributing the entire time. We want to send love and honor to them as well. We also want to acknowledge, Dwayne started this off by talking about the amount of people we interviewed, who applied, and we want to talk about a little bit about how we included those perspectives as well, in addition to the wonderful work that was done as part of this panel. The panel met recurringly again and again to go through different topics, to have critical discussions, to talk about how to gather more perspective. In addition to that, we also conducted focus groups, many of whom were people who applied for the LEAP, but didn't have the opportunity to participate in this capacity. So those perspectives were also brought into these recommendations that you're seeing here today too. So I wanted to name that. I wanted to talk about the different ways that we can incorporate and ensure that lived experience and expertise are represented. And in terms of kicking off questions, I want to start there. So in these conversations we had as a LEAP, we talked a lot about lived experience and lived expertise. And members of the panel gave some really unique perspectives about the difference of that language. Sometimes it is used interchangeably, but there are some nuances between when we talk about lived experience and lived expertise. And I'm wondering if some of the folks on the panel can chime in to that.
I'd love a piece of that one. I seen it when it came in and immediately wanted a piece of that one. So it's Philip Cooper out of North Carolina. I'll say, like, having lived experience means that you've experienced it. You've been incarcerated. You've been in the carceral state. You've re-entered society. You've done that before. That's a lived experience that you have experienced. My opinion is that it becomes an expertise whenever you're able to articulate the process, when you're able to articulate the process across cultures, when you're able to make innovations or have grant funding come in based off of your articulation. Then it becomes an expertise. You know, the lived experience is great, but lived experience with no strategy can also be harmful. You know, just like passion, we have a lot of passion, but passion without a strategy can do harm. So when we get to this expertise side, we understand that me at the table as a person in long-term recovery, I'm also still taking care of my recovery. You see, us people that have that preach lived expertise, we also understand that we have not arrived, but we're continuing to be on this journey. Woe to him who says that they have recovered. Woe to them who feel like they are know-it-alls just because they have lived experience, because you have to be careful for those, because at that point in time, it might be hard to work with that person. And we all know it takes a village to be able to address a lot of the stigmas that we're seeing, especially in the rural areas. And it takes partnering with people who may have different belief systems. But that expertise kicks in when you're able to work with people who have different belief systems to address this stigma. So that's my take on it. The lived experience alone is great. Glory be to God for those in recovery. But when you start doing this thing on the clock, it hits different, because your job ain't your recovery.
Can I jump in on that?
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you to my brother Philip. Yeah, cool. You know what's up. But I also want to speak about the importance of understanding and recognizing the intersectionality. That's where the expertise comes. Because it's not just that we've been there. It's that, as Philip says, we can comprehensively and concisively take what we have realized and learned from walking those steps and speak about it to academics, to politicians. We also know the power of the different experiences of those who have experienced incarcerations. We know and recognize that there are different experiences. I'm a woman, I experience it different from Coop, who's a man. And we incorporate all of that into our journey through the intersectionality. And that plays a very big part. And I just wanted to throw that in there. Coop, you know how I feel about you, boo-boo.
Amazing, amazing. Right. So another question that came in, and it came up a little bit earlier, Ronald. I think this may be to you. Someone wanted to know how they could find more information about the Healing Humanity Program.
Okay, so I'm on LinkedIn, and I posted my LinkedIn in the chat. But yeah, so Healing Humanity is a business I created on the inside, and I took it on the outside. And what happened in prison was the violence was high. I was on like the faith-based yard. It's like a yard where guys who've obtained a certain level of knowledge and discipline, they put them in that yard. But I was noticing on the other prison yard, there was a lot of juggings, a lot of fighting, because I was a counsel substitute, a jailhouse lawyer or a legal scholar. I had access to the entire prison. So I noticed the spike in violence and inmate or incarcerated person violence, correctional officer, as well as correctional officer and incarcerated person violence. I said, you know what, I got to step in. I have to do something about this. So what I did was I started a program. It was a trauma-informed program in the prison. I didn't have any knowledge of trauma. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have any background in mental health, but I read a bunch of books. I had all these lived experiences. So I took the trauma information, made it relatable to my own experiences, and I started reading trauma about maybe 20 years ago. So I got a class of about maybe 200 guys. All these guys are way younger than me, just come to the prison system. But they're responsible for this spike in violence. I'm like, man. So I'm talking about trauma with them, talking about ACEs, talking about everything concerning PTSD, post-incarceration syndrome, just give them that awareness. Why they react the way they reacted, about their ACEs, how many ACEs they got, this many ACEs constitute why so many people are dying in prison. Because you know, the higher your ACE level, the higher your stress level, the higher your triggers you have, the less immune health you have. I began to teach that when I was in prison. So when I walked out of prison, I was hired by this organization I work for now, VOTE. And VOTE stands for Voice of the Experience. That's our acronym, Voice of the Experience. So I was assigned to a task force. The task force is called the Stop Solitary Confinement of Mentally Ill People. And the first day, 1 week after my release, I go to the task force meeting. I'm sitting in the task force meeting with the Secretary of DOC and his entire staff. Now, I was just in prison for 25 years under these people administration, but now I'm sitting on a task force with them. And the secretary asked me, said, man, I know you. I said, yeah, my name is Ronald Marshall. I was just left Rayburn. I'm the one that started the trauma program. He said, you right. He said, I want to work with you. He said, you still doing that program? I said, yes, I'm still doing that program. He said, listen, we need you to come in and train our correctional officers because they don't know the difference between a mental health crisis or someone who's being defiant. So now I created Healing Humanity. And Healing Humanity goes in all the state prisons and all the state jails, teaching trauma-informed care to not only incarcerated people, but to also correctional staff. And that's how Healing Humanity was born out of that experience.
Thank you for sharing that, Ronald. I think that that's such a powerful example of how lived expertise can then be utilized, and powerfully so, to create systemic and structural change. So I appreciate you taking the time of walking us through that so folks could hear and see what the dynamic impact of lived experience looks like. There's a question that came in a little earlier. We have a lot of really great questions, so we're going to do our best to get through them all. Thank you for submitting them and continue to. So there was a comment that came in, a salute to the dedication of accountability and transparency, and specifically around evaluation. And so the question really is around what are the different performance measurements in LEAP's first project, Stepping Up, and they're asking that through the context of healthier individuals, healthier communities, more effective systems, diversion from incarceration, racial disparity reduction. And so how did or will the LEAP have input on the performance measurement expectations? And so to that, I'll turn it over to CSG to respond and Stepping Up.
Hi, everybody. This has been great. I've so enjoyed hearing everybody and being a part of this as well. And so I'll keep my response short because there's a lot of really good questions in here. So the focus of the LEAP for this, initial session or this initial grouping of the LEAP was really focused on reviewing our actual structure of Stepping Up. So it wasn't focused on necessarily evaluating the effectiveness of Stepping Up, across our counties and so forth. It was more about how can we make sure that the foundational structure and guidance that we're providing to our counties is informed and infused with that lived experience voice. So the angle and perspective, was different for this particular project. So that's my short answer.
Thank you. Okay. So then there's a question that comes in and it says, is there a recommended length of time for a LEAP panelist to serve? So a person to sit on a panel, and is it important to refresh the panel to prevent burnout? I would love to hear from the LEAP. I'll also chime in a bit from here too. But yeah, I'll wait. I'll chime in after the LEAP. Do y'all think that there's a recommended time, and what are some important ways to refresh the panel to prevent or reduce the possibilities of burnout?
I can jump in. Where y'all at, Mom? Where y'all at? Where y'all at? So I don't think there's a recommended time. At the end of the day, when you have passion and you have commitment to this work, you are going to ride this bus till the wheels fall off. And if they fall off, you're going to pick them up and carry the bus on your back. We don't have an expiration date. Every time I went to jail and they wanted to put me up under the jail, they didn't give me an expiration date. They barely gave me a release date. This work has no expiration date until we end mass incarceration, until we end the criminalization of those with behavioral health issues. When we do that, then we will expire. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would add, scope of work plays a major role in this too. Because see, I've been boots on the ground most of my journey, you dig. And then when I moved into like being the executive director of an organization, it was a different kind of stress. Like it's one kind of stress you're dealing with when you're trying to get somebody an ID at the DMV that just got out of prison and don't have any vital records. It's another stress whenever you're in a meeting with another organization or three that are getting a lot of funding but ain't doing the work, and your team is having to do all the work, and you're having to keep your cool and maintain integrity and not go gangster in this meeting and call everybody out. That's a hard thing, and what I've learned is in corporate America, like it's more cutthroat stuff that goes on than it was in the streets. So, you heard me say a couple of times during this, taking care of my recovery. My recovery always has to be the priority for me to last in this work. And so for a person that's wanting to be in this work, as long as they understand that, what my sister Skip just now said makes sense. But for those people, and I'm going to say, woe to those people who get to the point to where their recovery is no longer the priority. And at that point in time, they crash out, and, rest in peace to them. But I learned lessons from what I've seen from people that came before me. And that's why I'm always put my recovery first.
I want to acknowledge that Edwin put into the chat, purpose overcomes personal struggles. So thank you, Edwin. The other thing that I wanted to bring into this space too is, as folks who are facilitating the LEAP or convening the meetings, I think that point about scope of work is so essential. So one, we were thinking about what are the different things that need to be are seeking to be accomplished through this work. How do we do that meaningful leap? And instead of putting a particular time frame on it, what is the time that's actually needed to be able to have the conversations and ensure the input? There were things that we thought we would get together and get done in the session. Folks needed time to process, and processing time is an essential part of this. So there were times we had to add additional convenings of the leap to get together, to hear, to process it a bit more, to go back to that particular word to make sure that that word is really going to align or be connected to the folks who we're intending to serve and be in community with throughout this process. I think another really important thing to think about in terms of like the capacity of a panel and ensuring the reduction of burnout is making sure that it's meaningfully impactful. Right. Skip mentioned it earlier. We're not bringing people together just to bring people together. What is the impact that it's going to have? And are we ensuring that there is a visibility to that impact and that the work is being followed through? We're not just coming together to have conversations, but we're being able to see the impact of that, and the meaningfulness of it is also something that helps to ensure that that there's a reduction in burnout. And I remind us that burnout isn't as often framed as like something that happens to an individual who no longer has the capacity, but burnout is also a systemic and structural issue as well. When there's not appropriate resources, there's not appropriate impact, when people aren't included, those things lead to burnout as well. So when you're thinking about how to really structure and have a dynamic panel where lived experience is going to be prioritized, you have to consider those organizational structural factors. A big part of that is making sure that meaningful compensation or that there's benefits to these lived expertise. We talked about that earlier. This is not something that we want to just, put a gift card on for. This is lived knowledge, expertise. This is beyond and above what a textbook can ever teach. And so being able to compensate that appropriately, sometimes that is with physical honorariums, and if you're asking for more time, ensuring that you're paying people more money, and or that there's a benefit to it. Maybe not all modes of honoring people is financial. That might be in ensuring that there is a position that's built into the role where someone can be hired in a full-time capacity to do this work, right? So what is the benefit that's happening or that's being created for the folks who are offering and giving, and most importantly, sharing their expertise, and making sure that that's represented very intentionally in the ways that whoever's facilitating the LEAP, if it's not a person with lived experience themselves, is thinking about what that process looks like for the longevity of it. It's not a certain budget you set aside. It has to be able to grow and be dynamic with it, as it also relates to the growth and dynamic of the conversation.
Yeah, and I would add to that, you know, from the perspective of, you know, as we were approaching this, it was, so I've done this work and, you know, in previous spaces, and it's always, you know, it's very, it has to be dynamic, right? Like you have to approach it from a very dynamic and flexible mindset. But with that, I would also say that, you know, perfect is the enemy of good too, right? So it is important to do something. It is important to do it the right way, but sometimes people can get paralyzed by doing it perfectly. And we still want, you know, folks to be at the table, even if it's not the absolute perfect setup, right? So I think the way that you can cultivate that within a given budget is to consult a person with lived experience about what can work within this budget or what makes sense, right? So, you know, rather than saying, oh, well, I can't do the LEAP, there's no way I'm going to be able to afford that. Well, then what can you do with the resources that you have? Because we don't want people to walk away from this thinking that like it's an all or nothing situation, right? That doing something is better than nothing as long as you do it the right way, right? So that was one thing I wanted to add to that, because and even developing the scope, I wanted to add to, you know, I remember us talking with C4, and even conceptually at the beginning, trying to even iron that out took many conversations of, well, this could look like this, and I don't know, what do we, and even that evolved over time, and it even evolved down to what are the deliverables going to be, right? So because we really tried to keep it relatively loose, because we wanted to see how things were going to go and what would make sense for this group, and what would provide the most meaning for our program, but also for folks that are part of this work. And the final comment I'll make is the feedback loop is so important, because I have been a part of, you know, groups before where, you know, the seat at the table is there, but there's no feedback loop. So it's like, I know I participated in this work group, but I never heard what came of that work group, whatever came of that. And I think that is such a disservice to folks that offer their time and energy to be a part of something. So I just think it's critical that regardless of what shape or form, you know, this work takes, closing that loop and making sure that folks know that their time and contributions were valued and they were incorporated into, you know, whatever effort it was that that was, you know, that they were a part of. So those are just some things I wanted to add from our perspective as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and there's more specifically, if folks are wondering, to as we develop this LEAP, we started in terms of thinking about compensation with the national standard for hourly rate for subject matter experts. And so that's kind of how we started and thinking about what it would look like in terms of compensation for time. So I know that that's often a really specific question. Mm-hmm. So I think there was a slide about it earlier, and I'm sure there's a resource that we could share, but there is a question about what states is the Stepping Up initiative. What states are the...
Oh, I responded to that in text, but we're all over the country. Stepping Up is all over the country. I think we've got a couple states that haven't signed on, you know, don't have a county that's signed on. I can't quote them off the top of my head, but I would defer to my Stepping Up colleagues that have been here a lot longer than I have to track all of those states down. But we have a handful of states that don't have a county, but we are available to everyone all over the country. Anyone can access our resources and be a part of Stepping Up. And my response to that question was also that is that the LEAP and the benefits that are derived from the work of the LEAP is being infused into all of our work within Stepping Up. So it benefits the entire country in terms of the work that this wonderful group of folks contributed to. So it's not limited geographically. Is again trying to keep that answer relatively short. Ashley, I'll take an initial stab at this establishing the need piece that Danelle dropped in, because I think this is something that's interesting, and I'd love to hear other people's perspectives too on this. But it's definitely something that we've seen, and there's a term we float around a lot at the Justice Center and probably beyond. We call it ground softening. That's when you're really going to be moving into something that might shake the ground a little bit, right? And so I don't necessarily have, this readiness assessment tool off the top of my head. Thanks, Risa, for dropping that in. I appreciate that. That's where the link that Risa dropped in the chat is where you could find more information about Stepping Up specifically. So there's not necessarily an assessment tool off the top of my head, but of course, the folks here know of one that's about, how to prepare a system for prioritizing, lived experience. But I will say, talking about criminal justice and behavioral health systems, that there is some ground softening that has to be done to get folks at the table that on board with this. And so and I think it's about creating that space that really eliminates that tokenizing kind of mentality, and that they're at the table, as Helen said earlier, as Skip said earlier, they are the table. So it's a reframing, right? So there's an education piece that I think has to be done, that we've done internally, amidst our team, that I've done, with other orgs. And I'm sure Ashley and Dwayne can speak to that more broadly. And I'd love to hear more about the LEAP, but that's just kind of my quick take on establishing the need and kind of that getting folks on board.
And just to add to that, may I chime in for a second about the need part?
Yes, please.
So, we think about academia, and this goes to the United States' entire system of education. There's always a teacher standing in front of a classroom, imparting knowledge to the students, right? That's the way we was trained. But when it comes to doing this work, when it comes to lived experience, you cannot enter a space because you have these degrees, you have this knowledge, you're this professor. You can't walk into, it's called a banking system. You can't walk into that space telling people what they need. You have to humble yourself, be kind, open up your heart, open up your mind, and listen. That's where you're going to grow from. When you walk into that landscape of ACEs and trauma, because people, like who said, we're boots on the ground in this movement. There is nothing no one can tell us about our lived experience. I'm talking about absolute nothing. So that readiness part, when that readiness part comes in, when you are ready to humble yourself and enter a space and say, okay, rather than me going here thinking I know everything, I'm going to walk into this space and listen. That's where education comes from. Education comes from listening to the needs of those who have the lived experiences. We have a thing. And it goes to that slide that Skip said, nothing for us without us. You cannot do anything for us without having our input. So the moment that when you are ready, you're going to know you're ready when you're ready to listen to everything that we have to say, as opposed to you telling us what you think we need. No, let us tell you what we need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a huge part of the work that we have the opportunity to do, and that's helping to ensure that those narratives, that the lived experience, that with an assessment's being conducted, right? There's biases in organizations that will absolutely prohibit lived experience from being able to be paramount at the forefront. And having those difficult conversations to that readiness component is a big part of it, to say, hey, let's talk about the structure of this. Let's talk about the longevity of it, the plan of it, right? Are we going to continue to ask questions? Do we have a strategic plan about how to implement that change? And so there's lots of different readiness assessments, as well as critical conversations that would occur to ensure that we're not bringing folks into a space that's not prepared to value and honor the merit that is absolutely associated with lived expertise. And so that forefront work is absolutely important, because we don't want to bring people in space and perpetuate further harm. We want to do the equity work on the forefront to say, oh, this is something that is at a high prioritization, and we're fully prepared. We're fully prepared. It might not be perfect, but we are reducing harm in this work as much as possible. And also going in with that humility, going in with open questions, recognizing that we have to be experts in a lot of different spaces. But when it comes to bringing in lived expertise, all we can do is create space to listen, and as much of it as possible. So thank you for bringing that in. I want to see if we can get through a couple of questions. I'll try to bring as many of them. We have 3 specifically that are still jumping out at me. We've kind of covered on it a bit more. Many of our panel members have done a lot of work at systems level and policy work change. So what were some of the things that you found to be absolutely necessary in beginning to move people into systems level, policy level change?
Well, I'll talk specifically about something that's in place right now that pertains to the workforce development side. So like, shout out to the public health professionals who have educated me. And that goes back to what Ronald said, like humility for education, to go in and learning with the mindset of learning. But what I learned from them was they talk about social determinants of health. And so as we talk about the social determinants of health of returning citizens, and we look at what resources are available for people who have SMI, right? Severe mental illness, for people who have a disability. We understand that we have to even educate our people about what SMI means, what a disability consists of, because when you look at vocational rehabilitation, their definitions look a lot different from what our assumption is. And so these people qualify for resources. And so what's going on right now is we're looking at, more on a local level, at redistribution and reallocation of some funding to be able to have funds that can help people on the workforce development side. I'll give you an example. As a dislocated worker, for the note takers here, dislocated worker, remember that name. A dislocated worker is a person who has been unemployed for 13 weeks. So a person that has been unemployed for 13 weeks also counts whenever you have a person coming home from the penitentiary. These people qualify for dislocated resources. These are workforce development related resources. And so typically the people that we're serving, the people are people, nothing about us without us. Our people don't know about these resources. So we're tasked with making sure they're educated about it. As we educate people about it, then these federal dollars start to get used up. Before that, you had people in their cubicles that went out in the community, so their budgets got cooked because they wasn't serving enough people. And now you have people on the ground, boots on the ground, that's educating people about the resources. Now they can't keep up with the capacity because their funding got cut. So now we're backtracking to work on policy and Workforce Innovative Opportunity Act. That's what it's called, WIOA. You'll have it in your areas. Check it out, Workforce Development Resources. But what we're working on now is having more funding allocated based off of those people who are coming home from prison. It may start with a pilot. But we're going to do our due diligence, like it says in our 5 strategies, in making sure that we do our evaluation and we're able to report back on how many Black people are we serving now, because there were blatant racial disparities that exist with those federal resources. And now, because of the peer support specialists, the community health workers with lived experience, we're able to tap into a community that wasn't getting tapped into, hence us being able to have funding that's coming in for a pilot.
Thank you, Coop. Skip.
I'm sorry. I just totally blanked out because I just thought about something else.
Okay.
All of this, whether we're building a workforce, whether we're creating services and supports for those who are directly impacted, is needed because we live in a mass carceral state. As Coop is working on workforce issues in North Carolina, I'm building a workforce of directly impacted folks, and I'm switching the model of service delivery in carceral spaces. So basically, you go and you get locked up and all your services are given by those who work for the Department of Corrections. No. We're switching that model and we're employing those with direct lived experiences to go into these spaces and deliver these services. Why? Because not only do we have the empathy, we have the lived experience. We know what works and what doesn't work. But what I was really focused on is what Coop said about the Workforce Opportunity Innovation Act. This is a federal act. And this also answers the question of where do we go from here? You know, I feel like Pinky in the Brain. What do you want to do next? I want to take over the world. There is no place to go from here but up. I always said working in New York City is city, then it's state, and then it's federal. I'm already making inroads on the federal system. We're looking at the Bureau of Justice. We're looking at the Office of Recovery within SAMHSA. We are in place in these federally appropriated systems. Why are we there? Because there's a need. Where can we go from here? Everywhere. I myself am thinking about politics. What y'all think? I'll make a good mayor, governor, council person. You know, the thing is that this is becoming so much, and it's always been so much of an issue. There's barely a person walking around the United States who does not have or know someone who is directly impacted. Now is the time for us to push forward. How do you get into this work? You stand up and you be accounted for. You be unapologetic about your lived experience. You do not apologize for them because they brought you into the room. Now that you're in the room, use that space. And that's that New York City swag coming at you. Skip out.
Yeah, don't walk to the polls. You got that's a great slogan. the Nell puts in the chat. I love that. And that's the beauty of this work. We come together, we talk about real things, we laugh, we are creative, and that's a beautiful part of the process too. So there's two more questions. We probably have a chance for one. There's one that came into the chat about, do we know of other spaces where these conversations are happening? There is a specific scope of work for this particular process. And of course, the goal is to continue to make more opportunities. So if you know of those, we'll have our contact information in the chat, and folks can let us know if there are maybe opportunities to think about what this could look like in other capacities. So we have two questions in the chat. I'm going to kind of try to capture some of it together. So one of the questions really focuses on what do we need to do to create safe spaces for everyone. This is in the context of serving and working with folks in release programs, as well as folks living with mental health challenges, looking at probation and county behavioral health services. How do you create a space that is inclusive for everyone? And also in that, could you talk a little bit about stigma and addressing stigma, and stigma playing a huge role in, I think, playing a huge role in creating safety, to create more opportunities, to incorporate more education opportunities for people to learn.
I could take a shot at that, Dr. Ashley. So I go inside Angola State Penitentiary on the weekends. I teach 4 cohorts, 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday. Each cohort is roughly 21 men. 21 different men. So that's all together, that's like 84 men that I'm teaching on the weekend. This is the reentry program. And how do I create a safe space? Dr. Blake, he's the mental health director over the entire Louisiana Department of Correction. He and I had an early conversation before we started this work inside the prison system, right? And I asked Dr. Blake, I said, Dr. Blake, do you think you can walk into that classroom and do what I do every weekend? He said, no. I said, why? He said, because I don't have the lived experience. I don't know how to make my academic knowledge relatable to the guy sitting in the classroom. So the question is, what do we need to create a safe space for everyone? Because I have those lived experiences, I can be vulnerable in front of them. And when they see my vulnerabilities, they know it's not a laughing matter. They know it's not a joking matter. They can relate to me, because I have 9 aces. Some of the men in the room have 9, some have 7, some have 6. Some of their traumas are worse than mine. And when I talk about my traumas, it automatically makes them feel comfortable to talk about their own traumas. So if you don't have someone in front of that classroom who have those shared lived experience as them, they're not going to feel comfortable or even safe to even talk about their own lived experience because you're not representing where they come from. So you need a facilitator who has those shared lived experience to make that room safe. And you have to create some norms further on. This is not a laughing matter. And you have to make them feel comfortable, let them know you can share what you want to share. If you don't want to share, you don't have to share. You can just sit here and listen. But when I talk, the way I teach, everybody in the classroom shares because I make them feel comfortable. I talk about my entire life story, from my early childhood experience to my 25 years in prison and everything in between, from solitary confinement, from juvenile to the adult. I talk about all of that. And in talking about that, those guys feel comfortable. They feel safe because they realize that someone standing up right in front of them is just like them. So you need someone that lived experience to facilitate that classroom when it comes to pre-trial release programs. And one thing you got to understand, if a person is going through the system, there is trauma. In order to reach someone with trauma, you have to have someone who has them lived experience just like them. And I have them. It's not nothing to brag about. My life was rough. It was tough. But now I'm able to use my lived experience and say, okay, I can teach these guys. I can teach them from a mental health perspective. I take that trauma information and I make it accessible and relatable, and I put it in street terms so they can get it. I need them to get it. I think the effective communication is making sure that these young men who are 18 and 19 years old understand the words that are coming out of my mouth. And I'm able to do that by taking that information and make it relatable to their experience because I have the same experience and they feel safe. There's a brotherhood that is created in that space. Every time I walk in that prison system, when they hug me after each class, the way they hug me, I feel the love. They feel safe with me. I can feel that. And it comes out in their hug. It lets me know that when they hug me saying, thank you, bro. Thank you for coming here and sharing your experience with us because you and I are one and the same. And that's where the safety comes from.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Whew. We need 2 more hours. As we are at the close of our time together, I just want to take a couple minutes to acknowledge a few things, and then I'll send it over to our partners to give a brief 30 seconds in closing. I want to thank you all for being so active and participatory in the chat. We see every comment, we're reading them. Even if we did get to address it today, it is going to be part of further conversations. We want to thank you for sharing resources and links and for being so supportive and engaging with our lead panelists. I want to thank my team, specifically Dwayne Watkins, who has just been tremendous in really facilitating this particular experience in partnership with CSG and stepping up to make sure that lived experience was at the forefront of this process, and even in how to collect lived experience and expertise. And last and certainly not least, I want to thank the LEAP. We have had just such a tremendous opportunity to partner with you all, to listen to you all, to laugh with you all, to share with you all, and your wisdom, your experience, but also your dedication and commitment to this work is just beyond comprehension. And so we are grateful for you. We're so thankful to you. And thank you to CSG, the Justice Center, and stepping up for the incredible work that you're doing nationwide. We're so grateful. We hope to keep in contact. C4 Innovations, our information was on the slide prior. We'll also drop it into the chat so that you know how to get in contact with us. We're happy to continue this conversation as well as continuing to find opportunities to work with our amazing partners, who I'll turn it over to now to close this out.
Well, I think you wrapped it up pretty well, Ashley. I don't have much else to add other than just doubling down on all of the appreciation for all the participation in the chat, all of the questions. We're so grateful for everyone that took the time to attend today and brought their own lived experience to the table as well in the chat and shared that. I just really appreciate the community that everyone created today. And again, also just share our appreciation for this partnership and the opportunity to share it with all of you. So thanks to the LEAP. We're so grateful. And yes, best wishes everyone for a great remainder of your Tuesday and rest of your week. Thank you all.
And I see in the chat that some people aren't able to copy and paste. We'll just leave this information on the screen and in the chat for just another 30 seconds or so to give folks the opportunity to physically write something down if you need to, just in case. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Yes, so the recording of this will be available via CSG and the Justice Center and the Stepping Up Initiative website. So they'll send out information about how to be able to review this recording. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.